we're pulling apart one of the most disturbing threads in America's immigration enforcement story. It's a pattern of raids, wrongful detentions, and raw intimidation that's now sparking something the Trump-era playbook really didn't seem to anticipate.
Which is a nationwide backlash.
A huge nationwide backlash. So this is our deep dive into the raw source material. We're looking at a situation that goes way beyond standard immigration policy.
Oh, absolutely. This reaches deep into issues of, well, democracy and fundamental rights.
Right. You have this aggressive enforcement on the ground, and then it's paired with just hundreds of high-stakes legal challenges happening in the courts.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah.
What we're really examining today is that collision point. It's between an executive branch that's operating at a pace and a scale, frankly, that we've never seen before.
Unprecedented.
And the institutional checks that are supposed to balance that power.
The judiciary, the states.
The judiciary, the states, civil society, all of them really struggling to keep up. So our mission here is to give you, the listener, a structured way to understand how the administration's most aggressive policies are actually manifesting.
And why they're hitting this massive coordinated wall of opposition.
Yes. It's about connecting the chaos you might see in a video clip on the streets to the really complex constitutional challenges that are happening in federal courtrooms right now.
Okay, let's just dive right in then. Because the enforcement action itself, that's where this whole emotional and legal crisis really begins. The sources we have, they describe operations that feel less like standard law enforcement.
And more like what?
And more like these highly aggressive, I'd almost say quasi-military actions, but they're taking place in the middle of civilian life.
The visual evidence from the sources is, it's stunning. It really is. And it immediately sets this incredibly aggressive tone.
It does.
We're seeing operations carried out by what the sources describe as a highly militarized force. And the language used in the footage we've reviewed, it suggests these are not, routine checks.
Yeah.
These are actions that seem designed to inflict maximum fear, maximum visibility.
And the targets of these operations, that really tells the story. We are not talking about border crossings here.
No, not at all.
We're talking about locations deep inside American cities.
Like car washes.
Car washes, Home Depot parking lots, swap meets, places of commerce, community gathering spots.
Everyday places.
Everyday places. And the agents involved are described as, masked ICE agents and correction officers. But there's this one detail it's crucial and kind of blurs the lines.
What's that?
The suggestion that, and I'm quoting, potentially bounty hunters are being deputized as ICE agents.
Okay, so that potential use of deputized bounty hunters is key. That's a really big deal.
Why is that so important?
Because it suggests the administration is outsourcing state power. It's circumventing standard police procedures. And by doing that, it potentially insulates the federal government from accountability for the kind of aggressive behavior that we see being reported.
I see. So if the agents are masked,
right,
and they might be private contractors,
the chain of command, the accountability, it all becomes extremely opaque. It's almost impossible to track.
And when you look at the alleged behavior, the reports are just chilling.
Mm-hmm.
You have these accounts of agents who are specifically targeting hardworking migrants, a lot of whom have really deep ties to the community or they've lived here for decades.
Right, not people who just arrived.
No.
Wow.
And the reports describe physical violence, things like physical ripping, throwing to the ground, and ruthless beatings. The fear this creates is reflected in the really extreme terminology that people reporting the incidents are using. They're calling the agents the American Gestapo.
Or even Nazi. And it's essential, I think, for our purposes here, to just neutrally report that the sources we reviewed, they reflect this intense fear in these communities.
Absolutely.
You have individuals being interviewed who are using that kind of extreme terminology because it's how they're describing the level of intimidation and, I think, the perceived lack of any legal recourse.
That's a good point.
That language, it just underscores the gravity of the situation as it's being perceived by the people being targeted.
And here's where the dehumanization becomes really explicit and systemic. One source shares the direct account of a U.S. citizen named Job Garcia.
Oh, I remember this. He was arrested outside of Home Depot.
In Hollywood, yeah. And he overheard this. Just an appalling dialogue among the agents. And it fundamentally redefines how success is being measured in these operations.
So what did he hear?
It was a high-five moment for them. One agent asks another, "How many bodies did you guys grab today?" And the other says, "Oh, we grabbed 31. Oh, what a good day. High five."
Wow. Bodies.
Bodies.
That anecdote is so critical because it reveals a performance metric that's focused purely on volume, not on due process, not on individual circumstances.
It's a number.
Just a number. The idea of a body count It turns human beings into simple data points. It's a disposable metric that's used to justify and apparently celebrate an aggressive enforcement quota.
Right.
And that psychological mechanism, the dehumanization, it's necessary. It's necessary for conducting operations that involve ripping long-term residents from their lives, from their families.
Yeah.
It allows the agents to see their targets as successful grabs, not people.
And we can see the defiance from citizens. Job Garcia, the man we just mentioned, he was filming the agents right before he was arrested. He was showing them banging on a truck driver's windshield and then violently grabbing him. That raw, unedited footage that's cited in our source material, it shows this immediate physical conflict.
And the community is fighting back primarily by documenting everything.
With their phones.
With their phones, exactly. Which is probably why these agents are so often masked. There's an incident at Salgado Tire Service in Pico Rivera, California.
Yes.
The documentation there shows employees and bystanders literally running an immigration agent off their property. And the sources specifically note that the agents wear masks because, quote, they don't want anyone to know who they are.
Which suggests they either anticipate or maybe even rely upon that anonymity.
To conduct these aggressive actions without personal consequence.
Yes. And you see that same kind of direct confrontation play out at that car wash incident that's mentioned in our materials.
Right, with the woman who stands up to them.
Yes, she stands up to the agents. She accuses them very loudly of effing kidnapping. She demands their badge numbers, and she directly challenges them, saying, "That is not your badge."
Wow.
And she accuses them of illegal racial profiling. She's just forcing the entire issue out into the light.
But the immediate repercussions for that kind of resistance are, they're severe.
They are.
I mean, you just have to consider the case of Adrian Andrew Martinez. He was a 20-year-old U.S. citizen.
Right, in a Home Depot parking lot.
He confronted ICE officers there. He was detained, then he was released, and then subsequently charged with punching ICE officers.
Yeah.
Now, the source claims those charges are fabricated.
Of course.
But regardless of the final verdict, that rapid escalation from a verbal confrontation to serious criminal charges, it sends a very clear, very chilling message to any citizen who's thinking about intervening.
The message is, resistance will be met with overwhelming force.
Immediate and overwhelming legal or physical retaliation.
Exactly.
What's equally revealing here is how the administration seems to proudly embrace this chaos. It's in their official messaging.
Oh, absolutely. The official White House Instagram.
Right. They're posting pictures of Customs and Border Patrol agents dressed in, it's military fatigues. They have military gear, high-grade equipment, as the source describes it.
And then this military posture is deliberately contrasted with the civilian settings where they're being deployed. Like the Santa Fe Springs swap meet.
Exactly. Which is described as a formerly vibrant, thriving cultural place that is now just menaced by these patrols.
And the caption on the post says it all. We show up, we stand firm, we carry out the mission despite the noise.
Despite the noise.
Yeah.
That confirms that the administration views public dissent, legal challenges, all of it, as just noise.
Something to be ignored.
Just something to be ignored while they execute the mission. And they even posted pictures showing people giving the agents the middle finger. They're effectively celebrating the conflict.
They're celebrating the defiance of the population.
It's a very clear use of state-sponsored social media to intimidate the very population they're supposed to be serving.
And this fear, it's not some abstract concept. I know you shared a personal anecdote with me about the impact of these daily raids on your own family.
Yes, I did. My wife's family, they live in Los Angeles, right in the middle of one of these communities where ICE agents are now active every single day.
And they're U.S. citizens.
They are all U.S. citizens. But the atmosphere of fear is total. It's palpable. My wife's mother, who is a citizen, and she used to be very active going to church, going to the gym, she is now afraid to leave her home. The fear extends to the worry that ICE is going to start going into people's homes just based on the tactics they've observed.
Wow.
That constant menacing presence.
Wow.
It makes the comparison in the sources, to an authoritarian regime feel very real to the people who are experiencing it. It is a purposeful, chilling effect on the lives of millions of people.
So, if the government's intent was to use this aggressive executive power to suppress resistance, the source material we have suggests it has just fundamentally backfired. It's led to a massive social mobilization.
Precisely. The reports warn that the U.S. is now experiencing this profound constitutional challenge, and it's leading to what is described as the biggest protest in the history of the United States.
The No Kings movement.
The No Kings movement. It's estimated at somewhere between 6 and 12 million people, all protesting this perceived slide towards authoritarianism.
So that's the counterweight.
This massive mobilization is the civic counterweight to the militarization of enforcement. It suggests that while the administration controls the executive branch, it has, perhaps unintentionally, catalyzed an unprecedented level of grassroots defiance.
And that energy we're seeing in public, it's being mirrored in the courts.
Absolutely.
So now we're transitioning from that street-level resistance to the massive institutional backlash. And this is what truly sets this administration apart from any previous one. We are talking about the sheer volume and the speed of the litigation that has been brought against this administration.
The pace of the executive action, it just immediately triggered an institutional defense mechanism. The president issued more executive orders on his first day than any previous president combined.
That's an incredible statistic.
It is. This rapid-fire action meant that opponents had no choice but to challenge these policies en masse.
Right.
In the first 2 months alone, 127 lawsuits were filed against the administration.
Wow.
And by mid-July, that count had climbed to 337 lawsuits, all challenging various policies.
So what does that tell us?
It demonstrates that the administration is attempting to enact these sweeping, permanent policy changes through executive orders rather than legislation.
Bypassing Congress.
And the courts are, by and large, rejecting that premise.
And here's the point that should make every single listener just pause for a second and think about the integrity of our legal system.
What?
A mid-July analysis found this staggering pattern. The administration is accused of actively defying or frustrating court oversight in roughly 35% of cases.
35%.
That's 57 out of 165 cases where courts ruled against them.
And that defiance rate is what constitutes the true constitutional crisis threat here.
Explain that.
Well, historically, the smooth functioning of the separation of powers, it relies on the executive branch respecting judicial rulings, even when they disagree with them.
Right, that's the whole point.
That's the bedrock.
Yeah.
So when the executive branch systematically ignores or delays or creatively frustrates judicial rulings, and we're seeing a pattern that spans 1/3 of adverse rulings, it fundamentally undermines the judiciary's role as a check on power.
So if a court order is just an opinion.
If a court order is merely an advisory opinion that the executive can choose to follow or ignore, then the judiciary loses its teeth.
It has no power.
And we move into a system where executive power is effectively unchecked. It's a very dangerous place to be.
And the judiciary's pushback isn't partisan. That's a key insight from the sources.
It is. This is not a left-right issue.
No. The analyses found that judicial opposition cuts across the entire ideological spectrum. Judges appointed by both Republican and Democratic presidents have found, and I'm quoting, numerous constitutional and statutory flaws with the policies.
And this is critical for understanding the gravity of the situation. I mean, when Reagan and Trump appointees are using the same language as Obama and Clinton appointees to block policies,
It's not about politics anymore.
it suggests that the executive actions are violating bedrock constitutional principles, not just running afoul of some political interpretation.
And the language they're using.
The language is extraordinary. The terms used by judges: egregious, brazen, lawless.
These are not words you hear from judges very often.
Not at all. Judges are typically very measured, very reserved. To use those kinds of terms, it reflects a judicial consensus that the administration isn't just making bad policy, but is deliberately operating outside the rule of law.
Okay. Before we move on to the specific policies, there's a really important, a game-changing Supreme Court decision that we have to talk about.
Right. This complicated the legal resistance.
It did.
Yeah.
Trump v. Kessa in June of 2025.
This ruling, it fundamentally shifted the landscape of judicial resistance.
How so?
It held that federal district courts, generally, cannot issue nationwide or universal injunctions. Now, for listeners, a universal injunction was previously the golden bullet for opponents.
It was the big weapon.
It was the big weapon. One federal judge could halt an entire national policy with a single order, just pending the outcome of the lawsuit.
So what does dismantling the universal injunction actually mean for the groups who are trying to fight these policies?
It makes resistance exponentially harder. It just does.
So instead of one lawsuit.
Now, a preliminary injunction only applies to the plaintiff in that specific case, or maybe the state that sued. This forces the opponents, the states, the NGOs, the civil liberties groups to challenge every single executive order in dozens or maybe even hundreds of different jurisdictions.
All at the same time.
Simultaneously. This requires an immense amount of time, legal resources, and coordination, which is precisely what the executive branch wants to wear down. It was a major procedural victory for the administration, even while they were losing on the substance of so many of the policies.
Okay, let's pivot to the the structural mechanism behind this whole administrative overhaul.
Right.
The Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE.
DOGE.
It sounds like an attempt at streamlining, right? But it appears to be the central political engine that's driving all of these aggressive changes.
DOGE is absolutely central to the strategy. It was presented to the public as a fiscal cleanup tool.
We're going to save you money.
We're going to cut waste. But its true power lies in its ability to dismantle federal agencies, to terminate programs, and to orchestrate massive layoffs.
And the crucial legal problem here is tied to its de facto leadership.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The unofficial yet incredibly influential role of the billionaire tech CEO Elon Musk.
Right.
Musk is reportedly the one spearheading the cost cutting. That includes ending aid programs and these initiatives related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, or DEIA.
And that arrangement, just him being there, immediately triggered one of the most serious constitutional challenges, a violation of the Appointments Clause.
Exactly, the Appointments Clause. It requires that officers of the United States be nominated by the president and then confirmed by the Senate.
A check and balance.
It's a core check and balance.
Yeah.
So 14 states sued in cases like State of New Mexico v. Musk. And they argued that because Musk is effectively running a government department, making these high-level policy decisions, dictating agency shutdowns,
He's acting like an officer.
he is performing governmental duties without the proper constitutional vetting. The argument is if the administration can simply bypass the Senate confirmation process by using advisors to run massive government restructuring.
Then the separation of powers is fundamentally broken.
It's broken.
And beyond just the leadership structure, DOGE's sweeping authority also raised massive red flags around data privacy.
Absolutely. Federal employee unions and 19 states sued in cases like State of New York v. Trump.
And their argument.
They argued that DOGE gained access to sensitive financial records, personnel records, even student records across federal agencies.
With no legal justification.
With no legal justification whatsoever. The concern was that you have this politically driven department that was suddenly mining the most private records of millions of federal employees and citizens.
What happened with those cases?
Well, initial injunctions were granted, but some were later stayed, which allowed DOGE staffers access to these sensitive data systems. So the fight over who can access and use government data, that's a core battle over government transparency and our privacy rights.
And then you have the congressional watchdog, the GAO, or the Government Accountability Office, stepping in. And they're challenging the administration's financial moves that are happening even outside of DOGE.
And this is perhaps one of the clearest constitutional conflicts we've seen. The GAO repeatedly ruled that the administration's grant terminations and spending freezes were illegal
Why were they illegal?
because they violated the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. For listeners, that act was passed for a very specific reason:
Which was?
to stop presidents from unilaterally refusing to spend money that Congress had already appropriated.
So this is a fight over a fundamental constitutional principle.
It is. It's the power of the purse.
Explain that.
Once Congress passes a law and appropriates funds for something, let's say for medical research, the executive branch is constitutionally obligated to spend that money.
They can't just decide not to.
They cannot. But the GAO found that Trump illegally froze 1,800 NIH medical research grants.
1,800.
1,800. The administration was basically asserting a right to pick and choose which congressionally authorized expenditures to honor, based on their own political or ideological preference. The GAO ruling serves as this vital reminder that the president does not have a kingly power over the federal budget.
So the litigation around DOGE focused on its structure, but the vast majority of those 337 lawsuits we referenced, they're focused on the effects of the specific policies that seem almost specifically engineered to target political opponents and to reverse decades of social progress.
One of the most unprecedented actions detailed in our sources was the explicit targeting of specific private law firms.
Through an executive order.
Through executive orders, yes.
This just shocked the legal community. We're talking about targeted sanctions against very prominent legal practices. Perkins Coie, Wilmer Cutler, Jenner and Block, Sussman Godfrey. What exactly did these executive orders do to them?
They essentially tried to hobble them, financially and professionally. The EOs, they barred the federal government from using their services. They suspended security clearances for their employees.
Wow.
They restricted their access to federal buildings. And they directed the termination of any existing federal contracts they had.
And the justification given?
The justification often explicitly cited the firm's ties to past political investigations.
Like the Mueller probe.
So
this was widely perceived as political retribution, weaponizing the federal government's procurement power to punish your political enemies.
Absolutely. Legal experts were stunned by the brazenness of it. Targeting legal counsel in this way is seen as an attack on the fundamental function of the legal profession itself.
And the right to counsel.
And the right of groups to associate with the counsel of their choice. It was an attempt to blacklist legal opposition.
But the courts pushed back.
The courts acted as a significant break here. In the cases involving Perkins Coie and others, judges ruled that the EOs were unconstitutional.
On what grounds?
They said they violated both the First Amendment freedom of association and the Fifth Amendment due process. The judiciary sent a very clear message. The executive cannot unilaterally blacklist private companies for political reasons.
And the broader scope of this policy war, it involved this systematic dismantling of federal agencies and programs.
Right, targeted under DOGE and related executive orders like EO 14238 and 14242. This was a very targeted effort to roll back the entire regulatory state.
Can you give us some examples of the types of institutions that were on the chopping block?
You see a very clear pattern. They were targeting agencies that regulate the financial sector or that support progressive social programs.
Okay.
So key examples would be the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was a post-2008 financial crisis watchdog.
Right.
The U.S. Institute of Peace, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Job Corps, Head Start.
All on the list.
All on the list. The U.S. Agency for Global Media, which oversees important international outlets like Voice of America, was also targeted. The goal here is purely ideological.
What's the ideology?
It's eliminating what they perceive as bureaucratic bloat and removing funding from programs that support education and poverty reduction. All of it done under the banner of efficiency.
And even core cabinet-level departments were threatened. I mean, the Department of Education. That prompted lawsuits like State of New York v. McMahon. This suggests the administration's goal wasn't just, trimming a little fat. It was a fundamental reduction of the federal government's role in American life.
And then moving to social policy. The administration initiated a highly focused policy war on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiatives, DEIA.
Right.
And that was paired with an extensive legal effort to roll back transgender rights.
Okay, let's start with the DEIA ban. Executive Orders 15151, Fort Inter 168, and Fort Leonard 173. They broadly banned these initiatives across the entire executive branch, federal contractors, and federal grantees.
Right.
What are the immediate consequences of that?
Well, it has immediate consequences for hiring, for promotions, for cultural programs throughout the entire government, and any private company that interacts with it.
Which is a huge number of companies.
A massive number. The resulting lawsuits, cases like State of California, the U.S. Department of Education, they challenge the legality of these broad, sweeping bans. They argue they violate federal non-discrimination standards and restrict the government's ability to proactively address historical inequities.
The scope is just enormous.
It affects millions of people employed by the federal government and its contractors.
But the policy blitz that targeted gender identity was perhaps the most comprehensive. It spanned multiple domains, all under Executive Order 14168 and others.
It was a very coordinated, multi-pronged attack. The EOs mandated bans on gender-affirming care for individuals under the age of 19.
Right.
They established restrictions on housing for transgender inmates. They instituted immediate and really arbitrary changes to passport policy for transgender people.
So this wasn't just a single policy shift.
No, this was a systemic effort to legislate identity through executive order across the entire federal apparatus.
And the administration sought to erase information as well. I mean, they ordered the removal of information on gender-related topics from federal websites.
Precisely. And this includes the high-profile conflicts regarding athletics and military service. You had EOs banning transgender athletes in women's sports.
And the military ban.
And banning transgender individuals from serving in the military. The sheer volume of legal actions listed in our source material related to these policies, it just illustrates the rapid legal fallout. It touches everything from education curriculum to public health information to TSA security procedures.
So it demonstrates a strategic, targeted use of executive power.
Aimed at instant, comprehensive societal change, which opponents are now challenging, one policy at a time.
Which brings us back to immigration. But specifically, we need to focus on the constitutional clashes between federal executive power and state and local authority.
Yes, the battle over federalism.
Exactly.
And the most dramatic constitutional challenge in this area is clearly the attempt to erode, if not entirely eliminate, birthright citizenship.
Which is a bedrock principle of the 14th Amendment.
A bedrock principle, yes.
This was initiated through Executive Order 14160. It attempted to declare that children born in the U.S. to undocumented immigrants are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States.
Therefore not citizens.
And therefore not citizens.
The judicial reaction to this was immediate, and it was decisive. Multiple district judges issued preliminary injunctions, which highlights the legal vulnerability of this claim from the very beginning.
And there was one key detail from a Reagan-appointed judge.
Yes, Judge John C. Coffiner. He called the order blatantly unconstitutional. Blatantly unconstitutional. This isn't a liberal judge making a political statement. This is a conservative jurist confirming that the policy violates established law.
And he cited the 14th Amendment.
He cited the 14th Amendment and the 1898 Supreme Court case, U.S. v. Wong Kim Ark, which definitively established birthright citizenship for nearly everyone born on U.S. soil.
So this issue is heading for a major showdown.
Oh, yeah. The Supreme Court consolidated 3 major cases related to this policy, which signals that the issue is heading right to the top of the judicial pyramid.
We also need to dissect the administration's use of a very obscure and very controversial law.
The Alien Enemies Act.
Yes, to accelerate mass deportations.
Proclamation 1903 invoked the Alien Enemies Act, and it specifically targeted certain groups. Initially, it was Venezuelan citizens who were alleged to be part of the criminal organization Tren de Aragua.
And this law is old.
It dates back to 1798, and it allows the president to detain or deport non-citizens from a hostile nation during wartime or during a declared national emergency without standard due process.
And the D.C. court system challenged this immediately.
They did, in a case called JGG v. Trump.
But the Supreme Court's response to this challenge, it was less about the constitutionality of the act itself and more about dramatically changing the procedural requirements for resistance.
Precisely. The Supreme Court ultimately vacated the temporary restraining order that a D.C. judge had issued. But critically, the court held that any challenges to removal under the Alien Enemies Act must be brought as habeas corpus petitions.
Okay, so for our listeners, what is habeas corpus?
Habeas corpus, it's Latin for you shall have the body. It's the fundamental constitutional right to challenge your unlawful detention before a judge.
So why does forcing detainees to file habeas corpus petitions change the dynamic of resistance so much?
Because habeas petitions have to be filed in the specific district where the person is being detained.
I see.
This effectively shut down the D.C. class action lawsuit that was aimed at challenging the policy broadly for everyone affected.
So instead of one big fight.
Instead of one consolidated constitutional fight in D.C., opponents were forced into this fragmented, incredibly resource-intensive battle. It required lawyers to find and represent thousands of individuals detained across numerous different judicial districts.
So while the court did mandate that the government has to provide enough notice for people to file their complaints,
the ruling was a huge procedural win for the administration. It completely fragmented the legal opposition.
And beyond these major constitutional showdowns, there are also these ongoing challenges related to the practical elements of enforcement. The conflicts with sanctuary cities, actions against immigration enforcement that target sensitive locations like places of worship or schools. It just reflects the total scope of this enforcement apparatus.
And that fight over federalism, it extended directly to the military and police functions of the states. The administration made these unprecedented attempts to federalize and deploy National Guard troops in Democratic-led jurisdictions like California, Illinois, and Oregon.
Completely bypassing the governors of those states.
Completely bypassing them.
And the attempt to usurp local law enforcement in Washington, D.C., that serves as a crystal clear example of this conflict.
It does. The D.C. Attorney General sued. They argued that the administration was unlawfully seizing control of local law enforcement and violating prohibitions against federal troops engaging in civilian police work.
The posse comitatus principle.
The principle known as posse comitatus. The administration's argument was essentially that D.C. is unique and the president has unchallenged authority there.
But a judge disagreed.
U.S. District Judge Gia Cobb temporarily blocked the deployment to D.C. without the mayor's approval. That ruling reaffirmed the basic principle of civilian and local control. It acted as a crucial judicial brake on the executive's attempts to use military assets for domestic policing over local objections.
A vital defense of home rule.
And the separation of federal and local police functions.
Yes. And this pattern of overriding local authority, It also appears in smaller but still economically significant ways.
Like the New York City congestion pricing plan.
Exactly, the rescission of approval for that plan. It shows that the administration is willing to interfere with state and local governance at multiple levels, really just to punish politically opposed jurisdictions.
Which brings us to one of the most fascinating segments in all of this, because it shows how executive overreach and political strategy can just spectacularly backfire due to a critical legal misjudgment.
You're talking about the Texas redistricting.
The Texas gerrymander misstep. The goal was purely political. The GOP intended a mid-decade redistricting push, starting in Texas, to gain seats and secure their narrow House majority.
But the Justice Department committed what political analysts called an unforced error.
A huge unforced error.
Involving the civil rights attorney Harmeet Dillon. It turned a partisan political maneuver into a legally vulnerable constitutional fight.
The error lay in the letter that Dillon sent to Texas officials. Now, partisan gerrymandering drawing maps to favor one party over another is unfortunately generally allowed by federal courts.
Right.
However, Dillon warned the state to redraw 4 districts specifically to satisfy race-based requirements under federal law.
And that's the key mistake.
That's the fatal flaw. Race-based gerrymandering, where districts are drawn to dilute the political power of minority voters, is unconstitutional. And it is precisely where federal courts are highly interventionist.
So by using race as the stated criteria, they just opened the door for federal judicial scrutiny that they otherwise might have avoided.
Well, they walked right into it.
What was the consequence of that?
Immediate legal disaster. A divided 3-judge federal court cited Dillon's letter as the central evidence in blocking the new Texas map. They ruled it was an illegal racial gerrymander.
So the political plan, which was designed to gain the GOP up to 5 seats,
Right.
What happened?
It instead risked a net loss of about 3 seats because the ruling forced Texas to revert to its prior, less favorable 2020 census map.
So it turned a calculated political maneuver into a major liability.
The huge liability. You saw the fallout among GOP representatives like Kevin Kiley and Doug LaMalfa, who called the entire process one of the dumbest things they'd ever seen.
Because they realized the error.
They realized the unforced legal error had jeopardized their narrow House control. Now, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito did issue a temporary pause, which restored the contested map for now, while appeals are processed.
But the damage was done.
But the initial ruling highlights the extreme peril of conflating your partisan goals with legally toxic race-based criteria. They manufactured a constitutional vulnerability that was completely unnecessary for their political objective.
Okay, finally, let's turn our attention to the global economic sphere. This is where the administration's aggressive use of executive power created massive disruption through new tariff policies. Policies that shocked economists and generated immediate legal action.
That's right. The administration implemented major new tariff policies at a speed and a scale that just stunned observers.
These weren't minor adjustments.
No, these were blanket tariffs across various sectors and countries, leading to significant economic disruption and immediate negative market reactions. The policy's core philosophy was pure protectionism.
To force production back onto American soil.
That was the stated goal.
But our sources detail a very specific example, the Australian paradox, that really illustrates how this protectionist policy backfired on its own stated economic goals.
The data on this is really clear. It's a paradoxical outcome. Australian exports to the United States surged by a remarkable 20% over the past year.
Directly contradicting the goal of reducing imports.
Directly. And to understand why this happened, you have to look at how American firms responded to the tariffs.
And how did American firms react to the sudden increased cost of importing foreign goods?
According to the economic analyses cited in our sources, American firms are, quote, swallowing much of the cost of the tariffs.
What does that mean, swallowing the cost?
It means that instead of reducing their demand for the goods or successfully finding local American substitutes, they're just absorbing the increased costs. They're paying the tax, and they're passing some of that increase along to consumers.
So it suggests a couple of things.
It does. It indicates a profound lack of competitive local substitutes available in the short term. And importantly, it shows a U.S. economy that is still robust enough to absorb those increased costs rather than reducing demand.
So the tariff essentially just became a consumption tax.
Paid by American importers and consumers? Yes. It failed to achieve the desired market shift toward domestic production. Precisely. The tariffs acted as an inflationary force. They increased costs for American businesses and households, while the trade deficit with certain countries, like Australia, actually got worse. It just demonstrates the complex, often unpredictable nature of global supply chains.
So punitive tariffs, intended to be protective.
Often result only in higher prices for the domestic market.
And just like every other policy we've discussed today, these tariff policies were immediately challenged in court.
Absolutely. The tariffs themselves generated legal action, not just from foreign governments, but from states and from domestic businesses. We see lawsuits filed by states like State of California v. Trump and individual companies like Learning Resources Inc. feature.
And they're challenging what?
They're challenging the legality and the scope of the executive's authority to unilaterally impose such massive trade barriers without any congressional input.
Yeah.
It just confirms that litigation has become the immediate institutional default response to virtually every major executive action taken by this administration, whether it's domestic or international.
We've covered everything. I mean, from masked agents in Pico Rivera to the esoteric legal challenges against the Impoundment Control Act. And the core pattern, it remains consistent.
It does.
Aggressive, swift executive action met by massive, coordinated, and often successful institutional resistance.
What we've seen across these clips and these extensive legal listings, it isn't random chaos.
No.
It's a system pushing past its legal boundaries and a public that is refusing to stay silent. This deep dive shows an executive branch asserting these vast aggressive powers and an institutional opposition from federal judges of all ideological stripes to state attorneys general and millions of citizens demonstrating on the streets that is fighting back in real time.
A system under stress.
A system under immense stress. If there's a message here, it's that accountability doesn't start and end in courtrooms. It starts with people refusing to look away and demanding transparency. And as long as these abuses play out in the shadows, voices on the ground and cameras will keep pulling them back into the light.
And that brings us right back to the heart of the conflict and I think the long-term prognosis for American governance. Considering the administration's proven pattern of allegedly defying court orders in roughly 35% of the cases that were analyzed, what is the long-term impact on the credibility of the judicial branch, and how does that defiance redefine the functional balance of power in the U.S. government moving forward?
A critical question.
We'll pick this up next time.